Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Okay, it's April. It's springtime, and we're, of course, excited about the springtime in Wisconsin because that means that the snow monster is finally on its way out.
Yay!
But Wendy, what else does that mean?
Well, it means that it's time for not just spring training, but opening day for baseball.
That's right, opening day. And did I ever tell you when I was 6 years old I really wanted to be a Milwaukee Brewer?
No, you never told me that.
I really wanted to be a Milwaukee Brewer because they're going to the World Series and everything, and they were my favorite team. So
I like them too. I went to George Webb and got the free cheeseburger when they got their, was it 13 games in a row?
Yeah, if they kick off and they win 13 games in a row, then George Webb, you get a free burger. And so I got one too. That was like the summer 80s.
Waited in line and it was awesome.
Summer 87. Okay, but enough about us.
But wait, Mike, how does sports ball relate to paranormal? It's not a topic that we talk about very often.
Well, first, anyone that's seen Major League knows that superstitions have a huge place in baseball. So we're excited to bring on baseball folklorist Dan Gordon, who we're going to grill him today about haunted baseball stories. And joining us from East Providence, Rhode Island, is Dan Gordon. Dan, how you doing today?
Welcome.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
It's a little warmer, so we're happy here. Okay, so East Providence, Rhode Island, what's the team that you root for?
The Red Sox. But I always kind of had a little something in my heart for the Milwaukee Brewers. I grew up. The Sox played them a lot when I was little. I loved a few players like Ben Ogilvy and a few guys I watched growing up. Robin Yount. And,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That sweet mustache. So did you grow up in Rhode Island or did you grow up on the East Coast?
I did. Well, the suburb in Seekonk, Massachusetts. So, yeah, suburb. It was kind of a suburb of Rhode Island, of Providence.
All right. So there's two things here that when people talk about obsessions or, how we are fans of things, that usually they don't connect that often. So when we talk about how'd you get into baseball and how'd you get into weird stuff, I think that'd be a good place to start the conversation. What inspired you to get there and eventually become an author?
Well, you mentioned the summer of '87, and that summer, that year, I got a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship, which was a grant to study baseball culture around the world. I had been, as mentioned, a diehard Red Sox fan, and I was looking to travel and heard about this fellowship and was kind of wondering how I could, find some, way to travel around the world and get this grant in particular. And a professor, anthropology professor that I had was a former minor league player himself, and he started musing about it during a meeting, and I just thought, my God, this would be heaven to travel around the world. And anyway, I got the grant, and I went to Japan for 5 months, going to ballparks just about every night, interviewing players, interviewing fans, then through Latin America, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Nicaragua, spent 14 months just totally immersed in baseball. And that's when I started writing, originally journaling and writing letters, and then some friends and author friends said, you should try to put together a book. And I just started writing articles and stuff. And eventually I started getting interested in the paranormal as well. I always had been, fascinated with stories, kind of more just hearing different, folklore. I spent, go to the Cape Cod every summer and started, would always be fascinated by the old houses and some of the stories I heard around the Cape. And then, so I ended up writing a book first on Cape Cod ghost stories. And then it kind of dawned on me that I could perhaps see what there was in baseball because of all the folklore there.
Well, one thing I'm interested in is if you've got to spend 14 months bumming around the baseball all over the world, which, that sounds like a really fun trip. You get to do that. What do you think was the most surprising thing on that trip where you're like, when you went to Japan or you went to Central America and you're like, I never, like, with the way they either treated baseball or something with the sport, what the biggest difference and maybe something that either surprised or shocked you the most different from our, usual American baseball culture?
That's a great question. Actually, the commonality is what kind of fascinated me the most. Just the fact that you could go, to some small, town in Japan to a ballpark, and people would be, have dragged, the whole family would be there, and they'd be totally, just enjoying the ballpark, and kind of like watching a campfire, like chatting, just totally immersed in it. But as far as differences, just some of the ritual, like in Japan, the fact high school baseball is probably bigger than professional baseball. High school baseball is like their March Madness here. They have like a huge tournament. The whole country stops to watch it, and just the fact that the players there, the players all have shaved their hair, and just kind of a fascination with purity. And baseball there is more like a martial art, and that it's more, kind of more of a spiritual religion and experience, and kind of a declaration of of values, kind of, if that makes sense. It kind of has it's like they players, the players that are most admired are the players that totally, sacrifice themselves, and, to the point of injury and beyond.
Well, that's interesting when you think about it, like purity or a martial art, because a lot of times when I think about baseball players, I think about that when you think about basketball players or football players, like a lot of them are pure specimens of like awesome physicality. While baseball, you could be somebody like Babe Ruth, who was a different kind of physicality specimen, and for them to, I think when you said like shave their head and treat it with ritual and purity as a martial art, I think that's an interesting approach that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, I mean, players actually bow to the field. They still do that to this day. I mean, even professional players, a lot of them. And you'll see some of the major league players, you kind of notice subtly when they come out, like from the bullpen or something, Japanese imports, that they'll still like bow or tip their cap to the ball field. Kind of like the ball field is their dojo, like their karate dojo. It's their place, and you can't. You have to respect it. And like, I mean, I've heard, seen, like, players like Hideki Matsui of the Yankees who were totally shocked that like American players would spit on the field or chew gum or spit or or whatever, because that's kind of disrespecting the field. I mean, they would never step on the emblem, for the professional teams. It's just like, it's kind of it's an art form, as well as a game.
That makes me laugh. That was the first thing I could think of was the tobacco chewing,
Me too.
He's like, because I remember when I was a kid, now you don't see that much tobacco chewing anymore. And not that we should sit in here and talk about tobacco chewing but you don't see that much chaw in baseball anymore like we did when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like even we go back to the 1982 Brewers, which is probably the last time I really enjoyed baseball, because once they switched to the National League, I was done. But like Harvey Keene, the manager, he would just sit there and you'd see half of his face like a half chipmunk. You know what I'm talking about? And just this old gross across the thing. And to think that these players come through and they'd be like, "What are you doing? Like this is our temple. This is the place where we practice something beautiful." I think I don't know. I like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting and that's fun. And when you got into the whole haunted baseball thing, it says you also wrote it with your friend Mickey Brad. Well, he's your co-author. I don't know if he's your friend.
Yeah, he is.
Like co-work. Yeah. Well, you know how co-workers can sometimes be like, "Oh, I love working with him. We provide great work, but sometimes I want to stab him in the throat."
Well, there were times, yeah, but yeah,
So how did you guys get together to start working the project? You and Mickey.
Yeah, we went to school together and in college, and he at the time, I didn't know he was a huge fan. Actually, a Yankees fan, which kind of for a Red Sox fan is kind of unusual. But it wasn't until after I did the Watson Fellowship and got back that we started. I realized how passionate a fan he was, and he was actually named. His dad named him after Mickey Mantle, so he kind of had that. He was born with the, to inherit that passion, and just like with the Brewers and so many other, it was Milwaukee in general, and cities with like just a deep passion for baseball, deep history. They're just kind of that, so there was something in common there. But in general, we were just great friends, and I actually had the idea for writing on baseball, and I just thought, Mickey's a fantastic writer as well. And I knew once I kind of thought of the topic that it was just something that's way too. I just knew how much research would go into it, and and that it would require more than just myself to be able to come up with all the stories and information and interviews we had to do to put the book together.
And when you were doing that research, okay, so you don't just sit there and like Google haunted baseball, because if you Google haunted baseball, it's your book that comes up, right? So that's the first thing that comes up. So when you get into it and start doing the research, how did you guys approach this, especially when all of these teams and all these franchises have their market, quote unquote marketing and PR to worry about? They may now associate with ghost stories. So how did you guys approach this when you were finding haunted baseball stories?
We started at the Hall of Fame. I go there every year for a conference, and work with the librarians there and do research there. And so I kind of started culling things there, and there wasn't a lot, as I kind of expected. I mean, there's the usual curse stories, maybe one or two stories, but and just realized that I started writing. We sent out surveys to all the players through the PR department, and I was surprised how many teams were actually willing to at least say that they were going to hand them out to the players in the clubhouse. And I got I think one or two responses. I can't remember from whom, but then we just decided, well, we just have to interview guys, and a couple of the PR guys actually gave us some leads. I think that's how I came upon the story on the Blue Jays to begin with, but in general, but we just started. We went down. Decided the best way to catch as many teams as possible at the beginning was to go to spring training. So it was kind of like an all or nothing. If this doesn't work, this probably isn't going to work. We got, Mickey went to Arizona, I went to Florida.
So you at least got out of the snow. You're like, if this doesn't work out, at least we got a little vacation out of it.
Yeah, it was great. It was heaven. I mean, for a baseball fan, like spring training and getting to talk to, and the cool thing about spring training is that all these Hall of Famers are hanging out. So you're not just talking to the current players, but tons of past guys and great guys. I mean, you got Willie Mays in the Giants clubhouse. You got Al Kaline in Detroit. I mean, all these guys are hanging out at spring training, helping out. Bob Feller of the Indian. And so you could, get so many different perspectives and stories. And it was really cool. And almost right away, as soon as we went in, the first thing we heard over and over again was, go talk to the Yankees. Go talk to the Yankees. And and eventually some guy said, Yankee Stadium's haunted, and the more and more, that just became a universal chorus, but we also heard a lot of stories from other, players, and a lot of players would just say, I don't have something, but I was on this team and these guys did. And it was, so it was a lot of running around, tagging. We basically spent 3 years doing that, not just spring training, but then Mickey, he did a lot. He was a consultant, he's in Chicago, and he'd go to the Cubs and whoever the away team, you try to arrange our schedules around who was coming into town. He, sometimes at Yankee Stadium or Shea, or I'd go at Fenway, and catch teams coming in. Sometimes we knew guys that were just, that now they were coaching in the minors, or that, sometimes you just have to kind of dig and really find out where the guys are now, which is pretty hard to do, but got a few guys over the phone as well. So
Well, it sounds like just straight up investigation going, and it's great that everybody was so forward with you and it's like, oh yeah, check out this guy, talk to this guy, he had some weird stuff. And I think we should probably start with, whenever you talk about baseball, the first thing everybody thinks of, like you said, is curses. So for maybe the people who aren't familiar with a lot of the different curses, what do you think is the most famous curse in baseball history that we can bring them up to speed?
Well, there were two. The curse of the Billy Goat with the Cubs, which died last year. You never know if it will be resurrected. And the curse of the Bambino with the Red Sox. The curse of the Billy Goat was about this. The Cubs hadn't won a World Series since 1908, and they hadn't been to one since 1945. They'd been I think 5 times from 1908 to 45. Anyway, in 1945, there was a tavern owner, Billy Siennes, who his nickname was Billy Goat, and actually the tavern was called the Billy Goat Tavern, and he wanted to promote his business, so he wanted to bring his goat to the ballpark during I forget whether it was Game 3 of the series, and when he got to the stadium, the ushers were like, the ticket takers were like, no, you can't bring him in, and then he was just basically got into this huge argument, and according to legend, he kind of showed the back of the ticket and said, there's nothing on this ticket that says I can't bring a live animal in, and somehow he won the argument, was able to bring him in, but it was drizzling out. The goat, started to smell like a goat would smell in drizzle, and they basically, that people were complaining, and the ushers had a reason to kick him out.
Right, a wet goat is worse than a two-fisted slobber.
True, it was much worse even for Cubs fans. And it's amazing, with curse stories in general, just how they take on a life of their own. Some things are nowadays it's even crazier with the internet, because anybody can make a suggestion and it catches fire, and then everyone starts talking about it. But with the Billy Goat, it was kind of Cubs fans started to believe it after a while. Some players would even make references to it. One manager, I forget his name, but he kept a statue of a goat on his desk. They brought the Siennes family in. The Siennes family at times came in, wrote apologies. They brought in witches. They brought in all types of things to kind of people to try to undo the curse. They had rituals. There's some pretty grotesque stuff, like fans severing a goat's head and leaving on the statue of Ernie Banks outside the ballpark. Horrific stuff. It goes on and on. Just kind of crazy stuff. And and same thing with the curse of Bambino, which was a curse where the Red Sox sold Babe Ruth in 1918, and after winning the series, and never didn't win a series again until 2004. And the thing with that curse is when I growing up, nobody ever said curse of the Bambino. And this was in the 70s, the 1975 and 1986. They you could say choked in Game 7, and 1946 they had as well. But a sports writer named Dan Shaughnessy just made a kind of playful reference to it, and all of a sudden it became reality for everybody, and everybody started saying the curse of the Bambino.
So that curse actually came from that legend actually came from a sportscaster just talking about it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
A sports writer talking about it, saying so he kind of made up the curse of the Bambino.
Right. Some could argue that he articulated it. I don't know, but he definitely before that there are no references. In the NCAA tournament that just finished last month, they had the Gonzaga and South Carolina were teams that had curses as well. The Gonzaga had a team called the Elite Eight curse, but the South Carolina and the woman actually won their.
You'll have to forgive me as maybe geographically challenged. Where is Gonzaga, and why does it sound like a made-up city?
I've always wondered. Until recently I didn't know. They're in Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
And yeah, they're kind of like this Cinderella team, but they never were able to get past the final 8 in the NCAA tournament. But the South Carolina Gamecocks, there was a sports writer who kind of came up with this back, I think, a couple decades ago, started calling it that they had the curse of the chicken because they never won a national championship in any sport, and it just kind of took off there, So they kind of had this theory that a governor, I forget his name, but he was mad because South Carolina didn't build an agricultural school. They built a state school instead, and he kind of stuck his pitchfork in the soil and said, that they're cursed. So I mean, these are odd stories, but the funny thing is just how they kind of take on a life of their own.
Well, and did you get to go to the Billy Goat Tavern? Did you ever go there, have a cheeseburger or a beer?
Mickey did. In fact, Mickey actually ended up doing a book signing there, but Mickey did beforehand, and they the Billy Goat Tavern, of course, is probably the biggest winner out of anyone with that curse. I mean, yeah.
Well, they also got made fun of on Saturday Night Live with the cheeseburger. That whole sketch was based on John Belushi and Bill Murray going to the Billy Goat as kids.
That's great. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was funny. We didn't even know about the curse of the Billy Goat when we were kids. I remember my parents on a trip to Chicago took us down to the Billy Goat Tavern, and they're like, this is where the cheeseburger skit comes from. And then we all had a good laugh. And the guys this is like 1981, 1982, right? So they'd say it along. They'd be like, you order a cheeseburger, and then they go cheeseburger, no Coke, Pepsi. And it was pretty fun.
Yeah, I love that skit.
So those are the probably the most famous curses that are now obviously broken. So I guess the 21st century is the curse breaker for most baseballs. So when it comes to, you say that Yankee Stadium you mentioned was haunted. Let's start with maybe the ghosts of Yankee Stadium and maybe a couple other stadiums that you think have the most interesting stories. And, it's hard to think of because all stadiums now, I mean, have the name, it's got to be 3Com. I don't even know if 3Com Stadium still exists. I know because I know that 3Com doesn't exist anymore. But it's AT&T Field, or it's McDonald's Park, or whatever it's going to be. And it all feels, everything's so corporate now. And you think in the age of corporate stadiums, those haunted legends just they don't exist anymore. So what's the story behind Yankee Stadium? And you figure that's got to be the place with the most history in baseball world.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Every year, it's hard to keep track of the ballparks, and I may actually misname one when I'm talking about. The thing is, in players' minds, especially, but also just either local fans or the workers in those ballparks, those stories they're very real. And so for Yankee Stadium, the idea is the old stadium. Now they actually have the new Yankee Stadium which is across the street. It's the idea that the ghosts of old time players like Joe DiMaggio and Babe Ruth and tons of other players, that they're still at the ballpark and they kind of influence what happens on the field. That they help the Yankees to win games in late innings, and many players would describe how, in late innings, sometimes at Yankee Stadium, the old and the new, the wind suddenly picks up, and all of a sudden something happens in favor of the Yankees. A ball will drop in. Torrey Hunter with the Minnesota Twins said, people say when you go to Yankee Stadium, just have the feeling that you're going to lose. The ghosts are whispering in your ear the whole time that you're walking into the clubhouse, in the dugout, on the field. I mean, it's kind of, wow. They got this, thing at Yankee Stadium where, and it's really cool. They have the monuments, which are just kind of like the monuments. They're like great. Some players describe it as the graveyard because it looks like the players are buried there. But, it's just kind of like these monuments that, that out that are visible to all the players visit them. Some players actually love, for ritual reasons, like Roger Clemens used to always want to touch the monuments before he pitched. And so there's just like this huge awareness of the history there, and the Yankees had a winning tradition, and so kind of.
That is really cool, and it's so unique to that stadium,
Yeah.
A special kind of home field advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't think that's fair to the other. Like, if you like, it's one thing. Well, it's one thing the field. You have the people on the roster or whatever, and then you have the extra people jumping at balls. Like, I don't think that's very sportsmanlike conduct.
I mean, yeah, and these players, like totally sane players like some of the most respected players in the game would. Like all believed it. I mean, like John Smoltz, like told me, like during the World Series when he was pitching for the Atlanta Braves, that he said like it wasn't Derek Jeter at bat. He said when I was facing him, it was somebody else. Guys like would say, like when I go there, I'm kind of nervous. I'm scared that the ghost will come out. Derek Jeter, one of the most famous players ever in modern times of the Yankees, said like they're there, they come out, we interviewed them because it was a famous thing that came out during the 2003 American League Championship Series against the Red Sox, where he told, they were in the clubhouse in a close game, nail biter in this Game 7, and Jeter said to Aaron Boone, like, the ghost, Jeter's like, Aaron Boone was like, how can you be so calm right now? And Jeter said, don't worry, the ghost will come. And then Boone ended up hitting I think the 11th, the game-winning walk-off home run, and so that ended up coming up in like an after-game, post-game interview, and so then that really took off. But in talking to them afterwards, they said, yeah, that happened, and we believe it, and it's just amazing how many players do believe that,
Yeah, don't worry, the ghost will come. Like, we could be practicing here. The ghost will take care of it.
But I'm curious because, you don't think of a stadium as a spooky place, like a lot of the other haunted places that we've discussed and visited and that type of thing, because it's such a huge open space. And I know a lot of theaters are like that too, but I'm curious, if there have been any, especially maybe at Yankee Stadium, if you've heard of any actual ghostly sightings. I mean, I would think it would be likelier in the building, like in the locker rooms or somewhere like that. But if there's been any reports or any particularly cool or interesting things of that nature.
The funny thing is that, like, there haven't been a lot of like reports of that, like compared to other ballparks, but much more players believing that. But there were, been a few like guys saying that, like Mike Gallego is a player who said like he always like felt like someone was like right behind him and as he was coming up the ramp onto the field. But manager of the Orioles and said, I forget his name, but he was managing the Yankees, and said that he actually believed that. I mean, he used to sleep at the ballpark. If he had a night game and a day game the following day, he'd sleep like on the training bench or something, and he would hear things late at night. And he said to us, I always thought that it was, the Babe Ruth coming in late at night after a night out in the town. So
that's cool.
Oh, that's fun.
But not a lot, compared to like Dodger Stadium, like, where we're in Wrigley Field, and a few other ballparks where players have actually, or workers have said they've seen apparitions and stuff, or things in the corridors.
Well, Wrigley Field was a place, when I think about, like, they didn't even have lights until the 90s, right? Like, it was all, like, Wrigley Field was a place with real grass and no lights and everything. And I remember it was a big controversy when they were going to they were going to modernize this field. That's probably, practicing at night is probably why they eventually defeated the curse of the Billy Goat. But as far as like apparitions that people have seen at stadiums, is there anything in particular that strikes you as either the most credible or incredible story that you're like, I can't, that one is crazy. I can't believe it.
There are stories. One player, I forget his name, said that like sometimes balls would get hit into the ivy and then they could never find them. That's just kind of really weird. But I mean, the most incredible stories would come from like security guards, folks working like late at night in the ballpark, and we talked to dozens that like all had stories like seeing apparitions, or one of the most popular stories is that security guards that would always hear the bullpen phone ringing, the phone connecting from the dugout to the bullpen, like calling for a relief pitcher, and they always thought it was Charlie Grimm, the manager, former manager of the Cubs. And someone claimed to have seen Grimm's apparition as well, and yeah, they always thought it was him, like calling for a relief pitcher or something like that. There've been like paranormal crews have come in there. Ursula Bielski, who's done a lot on Illinois and Chicago hauntings.
Oh yeah.
No, we know Ursula.
We go to her ghost conference.
She got called in 1998. I mean, it's part of the whole paranormal lore of the Cubs. The Cubs were winning that season, and it was right. They were wondering, like why are we winning? They brought her in, and she went to various places throughout the ballpark, and found nothing, like in the press booth, and on the field, and basically when they went into the outfield bleachers, that they got like a lot of like cold spots. And thought that something was going on. So they thought that it was right after Harry Carey had died, the famous Cubs announcer.
Cubs win.
Yeah. So the Cubs actually thought like maybe he was like, helping the Cubs to win or something like that. But, but it kind of made sense, afterwards, Ursula told us, because she thought like that, in terms of like passion, where would the most passion be in a ballpark beside, in the bleachers, where the diehards are, they come, night after night to the ballpark.
I wonder what makes it a bunch, like we've been talking about Chicago a bunch, and I wonder what makes that place particularly superstitious. Like,
yeah.
Yankee, you understand, because it's been around for so long, and like they have so many championships. I mean, geez, Louis, they've obviously won the most World Series out of anybody, and so there's so much history, and New York's so big. I guess Chicago's huge too, but the fact
they have 2 baseball teams.
That's true. They got 2 baseball teams, and everybody forgets about the White Sox. Do the White Sox have any stories you've heard or anything like that? Or, Comiskey Park, at least the new one, seems too nice and too new to have any stories. But the old Comiskey Park or anything like that, have you heard anything about Chicago's forgotten team, the poor Sox?
We did a whole chapter just on the White Sox, because they had a long drought too. I forget how many years, but they never had a curse story behind it. But we interviewed a gentleman named Dr. David Fletcher. Chicago White Sox were probably most famous in history and lore for the Chicago Black Sox, who in 1918, I believe, were found to have fixed the games, were found guilty of fixing games, which was actually quite common at the time, but they were kind of like became the scapegoat, so to speak. And they basically got was it Shoeless Joe Jackson? It became kind of the basis of the movie Field of Dreams. But like Shoeless Joe Jackson was kicked out. A bunch of players were banned, and one of those players, Buck Weaver, was not part of the, thought later on not to have been part of it, just because he batted like in the 300s during the series, and he kind of kept saying I wasn't part of the fixing of the series, and so Dr. David Fletcher was a huge White Sox fan, and all of it one day he says he encountered Buck Weaver, had kind of sort of an apparition of him. Weaver kind of said, free my name, or and basically he spent his lifetime kind of trying to get reinstate Weaver from the banned list. Weaver's long gone, of course, and it's kind of been his passion, and he's had a few other encounters there as well with Weaver and some of the folks that work with him as well.
That's interesting that first of all, Buck Weaver is a sweet name. Like he should be like the star of an action movie or something like that. But second of all, the fact that the idea that you had to rehabilitate his name, that he came to Dr. Fletcher to avenge me, kind of thing. And I feel that's almost what. Do you ever see that movie 61 that Billy Crystal directed? about like that he was trying to rehabilitate Roger Maris.
Right, yeah.
Because everybody was mad at him for breaking Babe Ruth's record. And I feel like that's a very, baseball thing that people that may have not been respected as they deserve when their career ended or something, people afterwards coming back to try to rehabilitate, clear the name. I mean, even Pete Rose trying to find ways to get into the Hall of Fame, years after he kind of sullied his reputation for gambling against his own team.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about baseball and kind of that makes, lends itself and makes the paranormal so fascinating, the ghost stories, is just the fact that people are so aware of the history, like more than any other sport, like people in baseball. I mean, ballparks are, a belt, nowadays, especially to replicate older ballparks. There's like so much honoring of the past. Babe Ruth, who's been dead since the early 50s, I think, is still, people can still picture him and they know about him like almost as if he's still alive. It's kind of cool the way people honor the past and think about it. And, I remember talking to players. I remember players talking about Tiger Stadium, which is another haunted hotspot. But players saying like, I remember like being so fascinated, like being like, I just loved being in there because I just thought like I'm walking on the same field as Al Kaline and as all these guys, and I'm using the same urinal that Babe Ruth probably used and all this kind of cool stuff,
Nice.
So it's really cool.
That is.
Well, speaking of players living forever, what about Ted Williams? Like, is he really is he frozen in carbonite? Like, have you heard anything about that?
He is actually, but I haven't heard any stories. I've kind of asked around a lot, but nothing. I mean, people in Fenway Park, some workers there believe that the ballpark is haunted and talk about hearing like the crack of the bat late at night, or a couple of workers talked about hearing like screams coming from the Green Monster.
Good screams, right? Like not like somebody getting like screams of like, "Oh, right, we won!" Not like screams
Go
like
team.
somebody's getting knifed.
Oh, they said like shrieking, but
well, great.
Yeah.
Wait, so sorry, I'm not familiar with the Ted Williams thing. For those of us that aren't in the know, what are you talking about?
Ted Williams, his family, after he died, there was kind of a spat and one of his sons felt like that Ted Williams had requested before he died that he wanted to be frozen and have his head frozen. So like if ever the technology someday to, bring him back to life.
I see. Okay, so he was a forward-looking kind of guy.
I always thought that story was awesome because that's what I want people to do to me. Like, I want to be frozen. I'm coming back, baby. Like, even if it's just my head in a jar, like Futurama style, that's okay with me. Like, I'm okay with hanging out in the future and missed like Mike's head or whatever. Like, if anybody wants me around. Yeah. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Well,
but go ahead, Wen.
Oh, I have a question because I'm not as familiar with the sports world, but there have been a lot of stories and articles that I've read about a place that's near and dear to us in Milwaukee, the Pfister Hotel.
Yeah.
Which apparently many baseball and other sports figures have denounced, refused to stay there because they've had such scary haunting experiences. And I was wondering if you heard anything about that or maybe other stories of overnight accommodations where players experienced strange things.
Yeah, tons. Yeah. I mean, that's the other... I'm really glad you asked that because like... the Pfister is, of course, legendary in baseball circles. Another hotel is the Vinoy Hotel, a little bit the Westin St. Francis, and there's some minor league places that are kind of like out of this, unbelievable stories. And the Pfister, just players a lot of players are terrified to stay there. Some won't stay there. They'll just refuse. But like guys telling me stories like, Billy Wagner, relief pitcher, longtime relief pitcher, told me that, he was kind of fascinated. He actually wanted to stay in what he called, quote unquote, the haunted part of the hotel.
Oh, wow.
And he even requested, and he said he got his money's worth. Like during the night, he heard the ghost of an old bellman making its way down the hall. He actually like peeked out and saw something like that. And he also heard footsteps and the sound of his door opening. His lights were flickering. Guys like saying like that they were so terrified at night that, I mean, that guys saying that they heard footsteps at night. Some guys actually like covered their sheets over their eyes. I mean, put the sheets over their head. Like some guys saying they got no sleep at all. Like, it's such a common thing.
I think it's a ghost of Harvey Keene coming in, waking them so they don't, so they get no sleep when they play the Brewers the next day.
Yeah, well, the home field advantage,
He's spitting tobacco on them from beyond the grave.
Well, you have to figure if those athletes, for them to admit and to say, I was so terrified that I refused to stay there again. I got to say, there must have been something pretty scary going on.
It's fascinating because like some of these guys are like these huge towering guys. I mean, they're going into the batter's box, facing 98 mile per hour fastballs, like some coming in towards their head. I mean, I'd be scared out of my mind, facing some of the pitchers but they're terrified.
I'm scared out of my mind when I get a sports and leisure question in Trivial Pursuit. So I can't imagine actually getting a 98 mile an hour baseball thrown at me.
The thing is like there's a lot of buildup going into these places, and some of it. So I mean, some of this is, in my mind, some of it's definitely the players' imaginations running wild too, because they're going into these old hotels, and like some players like have said, like you walk into the Pfister and you see the sculptures there and stuff like that, and it's almost like it's got this paranormal element to it, or these things that and like some
definitely
and they hear the pounding of the wall, which might be like the pipes pounding, or it might not, but there so many players have talked about stuff, but they even like do like pranks on each other where the older players, players will try to terrify one another and like actually set up the rooms and put fishing line on lamps and like in the middle of the night from outside the door, pull lamp off.
That's just cruel.
Yeah, and so it's that's part of the culture too. But then like some of the guys who had experiences, who doing the pranks, like I'd interview them, like the Weston St. Francis, Ellis Burks, of longtime veteran, when he was teammates with CC Sabathia, or the Yank, went back when Sabathia was, I can't remember the team name, I'm sorry, but they where he would like basically, they were terrifying him and like telling stories about a haunted elevator, and then, and Coco Crisp, and like they went up the elevator and the elevator started to sputter a little bit, and they were like totally terrified, and then like so I'm asking Burks about it. He goes, yeah, again, I mean, I did that. But then he says, but it's real. It happened to me. And then he started talking about seeing an apparition in the room, like they had this player suite and seeing like someone, walking across in the other room. So like it's kind of, it's just a huge amount of buildup.
And so was that would you just tell that story? Was that the Vinoy where they were doing the elevator stuff?
No, that was the Weston St. Francis, which is in San Francisco. Right. I'm sorry. That's where players stayed when they played the San Francisco Giants. But the Vinoy is another in Tampa, St. Petersburg. That's another place that's totally wild.
Sure. Well, I think the thing about we talk about baseball players joking with each other, and I have to do a plug real quick for Allison Jornlin from Milwaukee Ghost for her ghost tour, MilwaukeeGhost.com. You can check it out because she goes in depth about the Pfister. So if you guys are visiting Milwaukee,
yes.
So it's cool that Dan, now you got the players side of it, and so on her tour she gets the people that work there. Because the hotel people will not give you anything on ghost stories and everything. They say they're haunted by the spirit of hospitality, which is like, yeah, it's really funny, guys.
It's a nice way to brush it off quickly,
right? So, but she interviewed like the people that work at the restaurant there and stuff like that. So to get both perspectives, make sure you read Dan's book about it, and also make sure you take that tour. So we would be remiss not to plug it. Also, though, but baseball players messing with their pranks, baseball players. That seems, out of all the sports, to be the most superstitious. Now, you were talking about Roger Clemens going out and almost paying fealty to the monuments, before he went and pitched a game. of the superstitions of baseball, what are either the most famous ones or interesting ones that you've found in your research, beyond the everybody turn their hats around for rally caps? Like, what is the stuff that you've kind of found when it comes to baseball players and their superstitions?
Funny thing is, every year new ones come up. So like last year, the Cubs on the pitcher John Lester, who was actually broke was with the Red Sox prior to that, so he'd been on two teams with kind of a history of curses. But like he's a huge avid hunter, and he went out with his dad during the off season, and they found some antlers, and he decided to like keep it in his locker room as a memento. And then the Cubs started winning, and he decided, like at home, I think I'll take it with me on the road, and he basically took it with him without the season. And then like somebody asked him about it, and like oftentimes players kind of like, it's kind of funny with baseball. Like some players say it's superstition, some will just say it's ritual. Like I just do it because I do it and I win. It's a kind of a blurry distinction, but like But then he like referenced like other teams that do stuff like that, and he mentioned the Royals, Kansas City Royals last year, who captured a praying mantis and decided to carry that around with them. And he mentioned that Anaheim Angels, who like carried a rally monkey that they had in the clubhouse, which is a stuffed animal.
Okay, it wasn't a real monkey.
Yeah, exactly. But there have been live animals too. I mean, there's been stuffed animals like the Red Sox in 2007, I believe, they had a stuffed parrot, and it was kind of like they kept it in the bullpen, and it was kind of a religious thing. And at some point, like during the celebration, when they won the division, the parrot went missing during the celebration, and like Mike Timlin of the Red Sox, this really articulate, rational, reasonable guy, like got on like on local TV and just said like, we know this is just a stuffed parrot, but we really need this parrot. We really need this parrot. And like, it's so important.
Wanted.
We need, and somehow it turned up in like some Boston University students of, freezer, stole.
That's amazing.
But like, there's like funnier things like, players having garden trouble. But like an old time player with the Orioles told me like back in the 70s that when he was leaving the ballpark one time, someone like handed him like a box with a shoebox, and he kind of, as he was going out, he looked into it, and there was like a baby turkey inside the shoebox, and they decided to like let it, as a joke, to kind of let it run around, and the Orioles went on this tear, and they won, like 18 out of 20 games, something like that, and they just like kept it, and the turkey kept growing, and they just had it running around the clubhouse, and the clubhouse guy was feeding it. So there's hilarious stuff like that. And then players, of course, had their own individual stuff. And probably the funniest thing I heard was Jason Giambi used to wear a thong, like a golden thong, because he thought that would always help him break out of a slump. And then like one day, like Johnny Damon, his teammate, was kind of like in the slump, and he suggested he borrow it, and he borrowed it, and then like other players were borrowing it. Bernie Williams, Robert Ventura, Jeter even borrowed it, and like it became this community team thing. And
oh my goodness!
I just hope they had good laundry detergent. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say, the idea of wearing like this isn't just a regular dude's butt floss. Like this is actual, like these are baseball players wearing it during games.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, and they admitted it too. So that's kind of the funniest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's the kind of thing like where you if you prank somebody, you like leave it in their locker or something. You don't just share it. So that's great. And those kind of superstitions are really interesting. As is. Now, going back to, reading a little bit about your books here, I'm interested in the catacombs of Dodger Stadium.
Ooh.
So is that from the Brooklyn Dodger Stadium, or is that in Los Angeles where they have hidden passageways? And why would they have hidden passageways? Like for Tommy Lasorda to escape, or what's the deal?
Well, Dodger Stadium is probably like, of all the ballparks I visited, was the coolest. I mean, just like... Yeah, it was in Los Angeles, the Dodger Stadium. I mean, it was built on top of when Brooklyn kind of left, they were looking for a spot, and they found this place called Chavez Ravine. They basically evicted like a whole bunch of people, and there's like a lot of photos and stuff and like video of people literally being dragged out of their houses for people refusing to leave and stuff like that. So it was a lot of passion, but it was built on top of like a hill and kind of like tunneling down into the hill itself. It's kind of a cool place that overlooks all of LA. It's a really awesome place. And there's lots of tunnels underneath the ballpark, and they have like places where they keep the old Brooklyn Dodgers memorabilia. There's stuff like the O'Malley family, owned the Dodgers forever. They kept a lot of like old stuff, and workers down there would report hearing voices of things moving around, coming in, being the only one with a key and then coming back and everything's moved around and like thrown on the floor and stuff like that. But definitely hearing voices and lights flickering and footsteps. I mean, work in Dodger Stadium has like so many other stories, like security guards, seeing apparitions and workers there, like long-time workers in the stands, like late at night when they're doing the vendors in particular counting their inventory, like seeing like apparitions on the field. And the cool thing is like, I mean, the eerie thing about ballparks, and I did a lot of interviews, Mickey and I both, like in the ballparks, is like, after the game lets out, the workers are still there, like into like 3, 4 in the morning, some later, depends. And the clubbies are always there very late. The guys that take care of the clubhouse and the players, but even the guys that are like taking care of the stands or the inventory people, they're there and they basically shut off the lights. I mean, they're just kind of like the lights might be glowing a little bit, so they're basically working in the dark in the glow of the city. So like it's kind of pretty eerie place to begin with. Security guards working in there, just walking around in flashlights, and in the dark.
Well, they're the people to talk to, right? Then, because they're the ones who are there when there's not 80,000 people screaming.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, they are there, but they're also there when it's empty, and there is something to an empty field or an empty arena or an empty auditorium that it's almost spooky in the fact that people should be there and there's nobody there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and it's cool. I mean, in these places are just embedded with memories, I mean, to begin with, a lot of the people that work there are huge fans. So like, they just have this association and this memory and so forth. But there's also just like, they're just eerie places. So like, I mean, one worker was telling me how like he would hear like footsteps behind him and one time, like what he thought was a child giggling, following him, and as he's walking through walking from one station to the next, things like that. A lot of apparitions and such, but like noise, a lot of eerie noises as well. And the thing about Dodger Stadium as well is kind of like it has this Native American lore, and kind of the rumor that underneath Dodger Stadium was, and that's kind of what referring to the catacombs as well, were these set of tunnels that kind of they ended like right near where City Hall is in LA, but like there's a series of tunnels where old ancient Native Americans, I forget the name of the tribe, that would that lived under there and kind of tunneled and stuff like that. So kind of there's a little bit of awareness of that, but there's also just kind of awareness of the the Mexican American history in Chavez Ravine, and players actually, the workers there, like late at night, they would actually party at a cemetery that was near that, an abandoned cemetery. There's a tomb where they love to hang out and party like after everything was said and done. So there's kind of this awareness, and like some workers actually like claim that they saw like a lady in white, which is the old ancient kind of like legend of lady in white, which in Mexico was kind of a huge thing, like a woman looking for her lost children, and they would see her like on the edge of the cliffs, right, where at Dodger Stadium, and like one worker said like they actually saw her like jump off the cliff, and things like that. And it's just kind of like really bizarre stories you heard from there.
I love it. So one more question for you, Dan, and we got to thank you again for coming to the show. It's always great, and it's exciting this time of year, obviously, talking about baseball on the week of opening day. But so baseball fans, like you were saying, like you were excited to go to spring training in all these places. And we know a lot of baseball fans that they go to spring training. They will go to try to hit as many different ballparks in the U.S. as they can and see as many different places and see their favorite teams play in those places. So if you were a baseball fan that was also a weirdo like us, what are the top 3 parks that you would say you need to visit as a haunted baseball aficionado?
Definitely Dodger Stadium, Wrigley, but also Anaheim Stadium, which has a ton of lore as well and ghost stories as well. So, I mean, it's kind of, you wouldn't think so because it's not that old of a ballpark,
right?
But like, they believe that workers there and players, like they all believe that the ballpark's built over a Native American cemetery. There are several ballparks they believe that in, but so that would be a third. I'd say there's also like quite a few in the minor leagues. Rochester in New York would definitely be a great place to hit up. And yeah.
And who's the team that Rochester is building for? What's their, like, what are they a farm team for?
Oh, they're Minnesota Twins right now. They were the Orioles before, but.
Oh, okay. So that's good for our friends in Minnesota. We know we have some Twins fans, and I've seen games at Target Field up there, which is obviously a beautiful new, place.
Yeah.
And it's only haunted by the spirit that the Brewers should be playing there, isn't the American League?
Ha. Wait, I have one quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Dan, since you've probably been to more stadiums than anyone I've ever met, I just have to ask, what's your favorite stadium food that you got to have?
In the U.S. or
anywhere?
I just love the udon and noodles in Japan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And do they have guys walking up and down in the stands selling those too?
They do, but I mean, it's kind of cool. Like some of the people that sell them are like these really, old, kind of crusty, very social, very friendly women, old women, and it's just like part of the experience, cool. Just buying it and like chatting it up with them as well. But very like, cool. yeah. But there's kind of like. Yeah.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Right.
So that's a great answer.
You'd think it'd be like the Great American Hot Dog. No, it's the Great Japanese Noodles that Dan's a fan of. Right. So, okay. So you got 2 books. You and Mickey have 2 books based on this. One is Haunted Baseball and the other is Field of Screams. And if people are interested in picking up those books to learn more about Haunted Baseball, where could they do that?
They're in bookstores or online. Pretty much everywhere. There. If the store doesn't have it, just ask for it. They can order it.
We'll have links to Amazon on our show notes, and that's going to be othersidepodcast.com/139 is where you can find those show notes, and then you can also. We'll have linked, and you can learn more about Dan Gordon and all the awesome things he does in baseball and the paranormal. I got to say, thank you very much for joining us today, Dan. It's been a pleasure talking about baseball with you and all of the ghost stories associated with it.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And you can find out more about Dan at hauntedbaseball.com.
Well, I certainly enjoyed talking to Dan, even though he was a Red Sox fan.
Yeah, me too. No, that was very interesting, and I never thought I could have so much fun talking about sports.
Yes. So but, it is.
He's definitely got the background and the history there to add that fun folklore and paranormal history that we so love here at See You on the Other Side.
Well, now, Wendy, we can't say that you're not a sports fan because you did play on the Packers Tundra line, like at Lambeau Field, rooting on the Packers. So you are kind of a cheerleader.
But let's not forget, in Wisconsin, being a Packers fan just goes without saying.
It has nothing to do with sports.
Right, exactly. So I thought that was a given.
Yeah. But no, I mean, he was really so much knowledge about baseball and haunted stories, and I really enjoyed it. We'll have him back next time we got a big baseball story that we need some commentary from the paranormal perspective.
Yeah, and it was neat to hear, he actually talked to the players who experienced these things. So after having read so many stories about, as we brought up the Fister, it was just neat to talk to someone who actually got those stories firsthand from the players.
Right, because when you actually interview somebody, that's when you can kind of make the decision of like, is this guy bonkers or what? And,
Right.
And so that's part of the fun. Well, it's funny because we did write a sports song beyond the Go Pack song.
I know, I can't believe it, but we did.
We did write a sports song, and this is back. We were working on some music licensing stuff, and they were saying that this sports channel needed a soundtrack. So we're like, all right, let's write a sports song, and it pretty much covers the most important things that a sports song should say, and that is go, fight, win. All right, this song's called All In.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at OtherSidePodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
You know who we can't forget?
Oh, we never forget.
We never forget our wonderful Patreon community. Every single person that helps support the See You on the Other Side podcast and do Sunspot songs every week, you are our favorite people. And we are going to be doing another Haunted Hangout
Oh, can't
on
wait.
Google with everybody. And that's going to be on Thursday, 4/20. So 4/20, obviously, I guess smoke them if you got them. And come to the See You on the Other Side Haunted Patreon Hangout on 4/20. And you can find more information on that where, Wendy?
At othersidepodcast.com/donate.
And if you're a Patreon like our friend Dr. Ned, if you're a patron like our friend Dr. Ned, then you could be mentioned and thanked in every single episode.
Yes,
as
thank you, Ned.
one of our great Patreon sponsors. So thanks, Ned, and we'll see you guys on the other side. And just this old gross